Sorry about that. So good morning, everybody. It's great to see you here. My name's Paul Andrew. I work on Office 365 in the technical product management team. And I'm here today with my colleague, Andy. Andy?
I'm Andy O'Donnell. I also work on Office 365 technical product marketing team with Paul.
So we're excited to be here today. We've got an interesting topic to talk with you about, Office 365 security. So we hope you enjoy the information, and we hope you have lots of questions. We'll be keen to hear your questions through the end of the talk. We've got lots of great stuff to walk you through this morning, so we'll get right into it.
Great.
So actually, before we get right into it, as Andy and I were preparing for this session, we were sort of thinking about how IT and PC use is changing over times, and how that impacts security and what you have to be cognizant of when you are responsible for security in your organization. As we were preparing for this, we were collaborating on this deck. And we want to show you how we started off doing that. And for purposes of this demo, and for a particular reason, Andy's going to momentarily be Katie Jordan.
Yes.
And what was my name?
We'll make you Garrett.
I'm Garrett.
Yes.
So just for 1 minute, bear with us. I'm going to be Garrett, and this is Katie.
Yes. But really, the main thing is just thinking about how people are really, as we were working on the presentation, it's all about now the ability to share, right? And a lot of the way sharing has really changed from how it used to be in terms of thinking more about the location and the privacy, and now it's really shifted to be more about the identity of the individual. And so when you think about, hey, I've got a document that I've been working on, we were working on the presentation, we'd done some edits to it, we had the Office 365 security session, and we wanted to easily be able to work on it together. And instead of emailing attachments back and forth, we now want to use things like SkyDrive Pro, just drag and drop that from our desktop right into the browser window here. And you can see how that upload is completed. It lets us know who we're sharing it with right from our SkyDrive Pro, so we can see when you first upload it, you're not sharing it with anyone, but you can quickly change that and add other users that you want to collaborate with on your document, so that you can, if you want to say share publicly, or if you want to share it with other users inside your organization. And when you think about how that has really changed from being really security-led or IT-driven and controlled and managed to now being very much user-controlled and managed. So here you can see, for example, where it's actually showing me that yes, I've shared this particular one with some other people inside of the organization. And so it's very different than how it used to be, where again it was always in a particular folder. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you, if I go and open up, for example, no, I don't want to open that. I want to just go ahead and view it in the browser. If I look at the 3-dot preview, we can go ahead and see exactly what we're going to get with inside of the viewpoint here. Let me just refresh my browser so you can see who I'm sharing with. You can see, for example, with this document, I'm sharing with a lot of different users, but I can also quickly see their privileges, and I can change those privileges to edit. I can take away their privileges to view that, but the user, the individual, is managing that, not IT. So if I go back to this Office 365 security deck that I'm not sharing with anyone, I can go ahead and invite Garrett, as the case may be, and so that finds that person within my organization. It's just doing a lookup against the gal, and then I'm able to change the permissions. And here I'm requiring sign-in, but one of the things that we enable is the ability to create anonymous links if you want to collaborate with someone outside of your organization or do sharing. You can also share with external people. So if I wanted to share with Paul actually at his Microsoft account, I could do that with an external person, and it will require him to authenticate if I enable this and use a Microsoft account to authenticate and edit the document. And also choose whether or not I want to send a notification. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm not going to actually share it with Paul. I'll just share it with Garrett inside the organization and give him editing privileges. And so then he would get a notification. And then you also notice, of course, that this updates with that information.
So this is crazy. We've got users dragging and dropping files everywhere, and not just with Office 365, I have to tell you. Users dragging and dropping files, sharing them with people outside of their organization, sharing their files with people for edit outside their organization without sign-in. This is crazy. What is this all about? What is happening? Right. End of vignette. So what we're really trying to talk about here is that IT and the way people are using computers is changing. The consumerization of IT is a really interesting phenomenon, and many of us think of the consumerization of IT simply as users wanting to bring their own devices in. And we know from an IDC study that about 95% of information workers use some kind of personal device at work. So this is changing the role of IT. It's changing it from where IT has control over everything that users do, from the point of they issue the devices, they lock down the devices in any way that you want, to where users have much more control. It's interesting, from that same study, we find that 67% of employees think it's okay to browse internet sites from work, and employers from those same users, only 43% of them think it's okay for users to browse websites. So there's a disconnect between what users think is okay to share, what users think is okay to just get out there, and what IT and what management think is okay to do. So this is something which is definitely changing the way that we have to think about security. Even more so when you think about the new generations that are coming into our workforce. The new generations are doing more work on social media and sharing things with their friends and doing word of mouth, and big advertising and big corporate brands and control of all that kind is having less and less impact. So we really need to take advantage of these new ways of work. We have to acknowledge, we have to foster, and we have to grow these new ways that people are collaborating, because it's the way that business is getting done now. So from that background, how do we think about security? We can't just say no. We have to think more carefully about what things we allow and how we do that. Targeted attacks are becoming a great concern. They are becoming increasingly sophisticated, and the term advanced persistent threat is being used to define what we see as some of the targeted attacks that are hitting some of our major organizations, national or governmental organizations, and banks. The concept of an advanced persistent threat is very different to the kinds of threats that we've seen to security or cybersecurity or IT security in the past, where, if any of you remember the I love you virus, which started off with just a simple email and became sort of got out there everywhere, and it caused a big denial of service attack, and then it went away, and it kind of subsided. Well, that's not the case with some of the attacks that we're seeing now. They're very low-level background. These folks are sitting there monitoring what's going on, waiting for a time to strike. They have a very specific agenda in mind, whether that agenda be political or financial or whatever that is. They're not just looking to do something fun that annoys a lot of people and goes away. So these things are a huge concern. The third one here, identity-centric environment. The environment that we operate in now is very identity-centric. I won't ask for a show of hands, but I know that a lot of people have multiple identities on the internet. It's not like you use your social security number to sign into websites everywhere, right? I hope not, at least. So you typically have a different email address on all these different things, your consumer services that you sign up for, lots of free services out there, your organizational or commercial services that you sign up for with your employer. Maybe you have services that you sign up for with an educational institution or college that you went to, and all of these have different identities. Lots of people use the same passwords across all of these systems. Nobody likes using different identities and different passwords. It's a different environment that we're having to think about and understand how people work. Cloud computing is a big driver for change in IT as well, as part of this background that we're thinking about security. 50% of organizations, of enterprise organizations that Microsoft has surveyed, are currently moving or planning to move in the near future into the cloud. 50% are not, but 50% are moving today, and that's a big number. And so moving to the cloud is all about reducing the cost of your infrastructure, reducing your reliance on single point of failures that you may have in your network, and enabling your people to do more and do other things. And cloud computing is something that definitely impacts the way we think about security. How do you secure a vendor's cloud environment? What do you have to do in order to make that set up? And the last one is regulatory and compliance issues. We know that governments in Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, Germany, India, Poland, the US, and the UK have all launched initiatives, offices, or programs to protect their cyberspace. This is amazing. People are going out there in governments setting out about how do we protect our part of the internet? How do we think about that? So we're likely to see even more in the way of laws and policies come up that we have to abide by. Even now, there are a large number of certifications and qualifications that governments have set up all across the world to think about how they control or monitor or actively block people's internet access. So these are some key trends that we think about, and I hope they make you think about how you consider security. We're moving on from the times where a company could just say, here's how we're doing security, these are our walls, our data doesn't go outside of that. Certainly, large banks are still in that mode of operation, but most organizations are taking advantage of some of the new social sharing and facilities and things that are changing to their benefit, and potentially taking on additional risk as well. All right, so trends. Click somewhere there. Hey, who remembers this screen? Everyone signed up when this came out. This is a screenshot from 1998. That was the year that Microsoft purchased Hotmail. Hotmail originally had a capital H, a capital T, capital M, and a capital L. Isn't that clever? It's HTML with some vowels in the middle. Yeah, that's a really old joke because so Hotmail has been around for a long time. Microsoft has been in the cloud business for a long time. And we just wanted to show that, to remind you guys that we have been doing this cloud thing, these data centers that people have access to on the internet for a long time. We created the Microsoft Security Response Center in the late 1990s. And the Microsoft Security Response Center, in the late 1990s, it was not a very powerful organization within Microsoft, but it has absolutely grown to be something that has a lot of authority around our organization. It's the group that responds when there is some kind of breach or exploit or virus or whatever it is that's impacting software which Microsoft has distributed. So if we give you some software and we let you run it and there's some kind of security issue with it, these are the guys who get on top of that. They started back then. We started a bunch of other cloud services. You got the update services. You got Xbox Live there. Our Global Foundation Services was started back in 2002. Is that right, Andy?
2002. Yep. I think that was about when. And it's a very important investment area because that's really how we've grown all of our data centers since.
Yeah. GFS is our team which is responsible for building out data centers. These guys. They work to procure the facilities, and they essentially design the buildings. They put all of the systems inside those buildings, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those systems in those buildings in a couple of slides. But those guys are great to work with, and they allow various product or service teams within Microsoft to have all of those servers and systems set up so that we can deploy the software onto them and be ready to go. We had the famous Bill G memo and the Trustworthy Computing Initiative, which was in 2002 as well, I think, maybe 2003. It's been 10 years since Trustworthy Computing Initiative started up. Before this Trustworthy Computing Initiative, Microsoft had some security problems. We had some exploits, and you would see graphs of people showing how many exploits Microsoft software had. We're here to tell you that's been completely turned around. In the 10 years since that memo came out, there's been a huge amount of work that's gone on. And we'll talk to you about some of that stuff that's happened. But today, there are very, very few security exploits that are possible on Microsoft software. The company works really hard to keep up that record, and there is a lot of effort that goes on behind that. So as part of that Trustworthy Computing Initiative, we created the Security Development Lifecycle, which is part of how we develop software now, and we'll talk about that as well. Just some of the other things you see here. We created Microsoft Online Services. That has become Office 365 that Andy and I work on. And we've got Windows Azure, of course, as well. So lots and lots of experience within the company about cloud services. Hey, so with that introduction, this is the agenda slide for our talk. Our goal was to show the best agenda slide you've ever seen. And our agenda is based around three different things. The middle of this wheel is about built-in security that Office 365 has. What have we done inside of the software, inside of the service, to make it secure? So these are the things that we work on day in and day out, that sometimes Andy and I get involved in, but certainly all of our engineers get involved in doing these things. The second part of the wheel is what you have as customer controls. These are things that, as an admin of an Office 365 tenant, you can go out and set certain things in order to change the security or monitor or audit what's going on with your tenant. And so that'll be the second part of our talk. The third part of our talk is all about independent verification and compliance. We'll talk about how third parties verify that we have secure and reliable environments. We don't, of course, allow customers to go into our data centers. And that's one of our, unfortunately, it's one of our security requirements that we can't let customers into our data centers. But we do have these data centers independently verified. And we'll talk about some of the compliance work that we've done. Compliance work takes a lot of effort, and we are working very hard to ensure that we have the compliance that people need to trust in. So that's going to be our agenda. We've got these three sections. All right. Let's get right into it.
Is the clicker working?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we've got the clicker working.
Clicker is working.
Okay, so now we'll talk about some of the built-in security in Office 365. So this is really all the things that we're doing as Microsoft to make sure that our service is secure and scalable and reliable and is going to be ready to meet your needs and be available globally to all of our customers wherever they are in the world. So what we're gonna just walk through all these different areas, but we're gonna kick it off here with just a little video clip that talks a little bit about some of the physical security aspects of our data center. So what do we do physically around each data center to secure and lock that down and make sure that only the proper people have access to that? So I'm just gonna show you a little video from the GFS part of our organization, Global Foundation Services, again, who run all of our data centers for Microsoft centrally.
Security at our data centers employs outer and inner perimeters with increasing security at each level, utilizing a combination of technology and traditional physical measures. Technical elements include two-factor access control, badge readers, extensive camera monitoring, and integrated alarm systems. Traditional measures can include perimeter fencing, security officers, and locked server racks. Data secured in Microsoft's data centers is classified based on its value and protected accordingly. For example, hard drives with highly sensitive information are routinely destroyed when they are decommissioned. We also limit access to our facilities and servers to only those individuals who have valid business needs.
Quickly, kind of a nice little view of the inside of our data centers, and you can see some of the security parameters, the physical settings that we have there. But we'll talk, a little bit more about some of the different areas we have. So obviously, besides the perimeter, things like the fire suppression, those areas that you have there, you've got the biometric scanning, so that everyone who has physical access to our data centers goes through multiple, background checks to be able to get their, and then also get the multi-factor authentication, so that there's obviously multiple ways for them to get access to it. But basically, the controlled access to the physical aspect is important. That when you think about all of the various Microsoft employees, we don't have access to our own data centers. We can't just physically walk up to a data center and get in, right? It's not just anyone. It's a very small subset. The fewest number of people possible that have physical access to those data centers. So even though we work in Office 365, we don't have access to any of the physical locations, or even actually the software part, which we'll talk about later. It's all very, very managed and controlled from an access standpoint. And then lastly, the extensive monitoring. The monitoring is really phenomenal. There's a lot of special systems that they've created, both from a security standpoint and also just from how the data centers are actually just operating day to day, so that we can see the power efficiency, down to each and every single second. We know the exact power efficiency of all the different, whether it's an IT pack or a module, all of the different types of data centers we have. You can see down exactly what the power usage is, and they can watch the cooling, the temperature. All of that is being is aggregated to provide the best view into how the servers are performing, and making sure, looking for any anomalies, et cetera. So it gives a really great view into how that's being run. And there's if you're really interested in the Global Foundation services and how that is monitored, there's a lot of other additional information that you can go and look at and see how they're actually doing some of the power efficiency aspects and what we've done from a sustainability aspect as well. So there's a lot that goes into the physical aspect, and again, that's really done by the GFS. Another neat thing is we try to build our buildings in locations that make sense for a couple of reasons. One, of course, is the seismic. Making sure that we're protected from any sort of earthquake-type damage or those types of events. The second really is power, making sure that we have access to a really efficient source of power. So we build, like in the U.S., we build next to a lot of dams, which is useful in Washington, where we have a couple of our, like Quincy data center, which is right next to hydroelectric power. Same with some of the other areas that we have the data centers built as well in Europe. So again, it's the location of the data center is also part of the security and resiliency and high availability when we think about how are we going to make sure that we can provide this service 24/7, 365, make sure it's always available for you. And then, lastly, when we think about the physical aspect of it, just making sure that we always are able to recycle a lot of the materials. So we actually use a lot of the aluminum and steel for building out the containers in which the servers sit in. Again, just making sure that as we are building and tearing down these data centers and creating new ones, we're able to reuse a lot of those materials as well. In terms of power, a really interesting thing, we had the opportunity to take a data center tour. That was pretty interesting, and if you're a customer, you also can have that opportunity through your customer, or through your account manager, to be able to go and view through a very special aspect of some of our data centers that we don't store customer data in, that you can see how basically how they're powered, and it's fascinating to see the backup generators. I mean, they are the largest generators I've ever seen. They're easily the size of from this part of the stage all the way over to that speaker. Basically they're just giant diesel engines, and we keep enough fuel on site to power the data centers for up to 3 days, all with generator power. So very, very resilient for backup. Ability to also, if there are fluxes in power from the grid, they can switch over to prevent any kind of damage to the servers or the data, the backup, et cetera.
Interesting to note the data center tours that Andy mentioned. Andy and I both went on a tour together. We have a data center just near the Microsoft campus, maybe 20 miles away, which doesn't house any customer data. Right. It's got something like 100,000 servers, but they're all used for development and test by various Microsoft groups. And so that's a data center which it's relatively, it's possible to get tours through, sometimes as part of executive briefing center visits or things like that.
Yep, so if you're interested in that, when you come out to Redmond. So when we think about the next aspect of some of our security, there's both physical and logical isolation of customer data. So from the standpoint of Office 365 is really being built on top of the underpinnings of Active Directory and how we think about logically isolating all of our customer data from one to another. So this allows the service really to scale, right, to be able to run and have all of our millions of customers having all of their data shared and pooled together, but at the same time not being able to see or access one another's data. So it really logically isolates and makes sure that everyone is completely separate, and provides a very robust security from that aspect. And then also from our consumer services and our customer or our enterprise services, essentially we have a complete physical divide. So basically if you think about Hotmail or Outlook.com and that data, those are physically isolated from any of our Office 365 offerings, and that goes for all of the consumer services versus the enterprise services. And that, again, just provides another layer in between, another again, another layer or vector point of separation to help with some of the security aspects from that. And then basically, we also have more, as the video mentioned, the data is also, the hard drives are physically destroyed after they are decommissioned as well. When we think about from a network standpoint, Microsoft has an extensive backbone network right up there, right a couple steps just behind, like layer 3 or level 3, and that gives us the ability to do a lot of our backups and stuff outside of the public internet. So when we do our mirroring between data centers, so in Office 365, you have your primary data center for a particular service, and then there's always a backup data center in the case of we need to do a failover or do a restore. There's always that aspect to it, and all of that data is traveling on a separate network from the internet as well, giving us, again, just another layer of separation between the public internet and what we have with Office 365. And of course, all of the communications are done using encryption over the network. And then another aspect, of course, is that this gives us the ability to also, with our edge routers, we're able to detect any types of vulnerabilities at an earlier stage and prevent any kind of intrusion into the layer where the actual customer data is being stored. Another aspect is that within the data centers themselves, we mentioned how Global Foundation Services is really houses all of the Microsoft services, but we have isolation between those services as well. Windows, Azure, Office 365 versus the consumer ones, and we have separate networks for some of that data as well. When you think about how the data is travel encrypted, but obviously the connection points, your endpoints to the service are always going to have encryption, so as your data is moving over the internet or wherever you are, that's going to be encrypted. But then we also have encryption at rest on all of our Exchange servers, so all of the data that's in your mailbox. As you can see here, it kind of lists out all the other aspects too, such as the logs and page files. That is also all encrypted using BitLocker on those hard drives. So that, again, is protecting against any sort of physical, any case of a physical intrusion into accessing the data centers. Again, so there's multiple layers of encryption when using Office 365 service. And then in a little bit later in the talk, we'll talk about what else you can do from an encryption standpoint, you as the IT person, to prevent data from leaking outside of your organization based on more of the user behavior. And we'll talk about some of that encryption that you can do as well. But just giving you kind of an overview of what we really do to make sure that your data is always being encrypted, both as it's traveling between you and our data center, and then in our data center itself. So from an operational standpoint, very important part in order to be able to get a lot of the we've talked briefly about the third-party verifications and certifications, and one of the key things to getting those, like what we had to really design from the beginning in order to apply for things like ISO 27001, was to be able to show a level of automated operations. It's one of the key policy tenets and how that they allow you to get those certifications. And so really one of the main things is for the software engineers to be able to get access to do any work in the Office 365 production environment. We had to create an automated operation system called Lockbox that really gives the lowest level of access to the service possible, and do so in an automated way so that you don't have any of the personal interactions of granting access and trust, and also doing that for the minimum amount of time that is required to complete the action or task, and then removing those privileges so that no engineer can just have admin privileges to the whole service for a month at a time, right? It's just for that moment in time till the change is made and then the access is revoked. And also we have separation between the Microsoft corporate network and of course our production services. So you can't just log into the production servers with your Microsoft credentials. You actually have a separate set that are controlled and managed and locked down. So when someone goes and requests access, they're then routed through the lockbox, which is making sure that they have already had verification from background check, fingerprinting, security training, and all these other, some of the soft aspects that are of the security have been checked against that engineer. Then it also sees what they're trying to access, what are they going to change, logs all of that information, and then again gives that temporary privilege just while they're completing the task at hand. So with that, we're going to break out and talk a little bit more just around, I'm going to let Paul talk to some of the security best practices, and this is a little bit deeper topic, so we'll break this out into a couple different areas.
Yep.
Paul?
Why don't you hold on to that? I'll use this.
You just want to use the mouse?
Yeah,
okay.
that's fine.
So the lockbox technology, is that something that you're planning to offer to customers eventually?
So question, I'll repeat the question for the audience. The lockbox technology, is that something you're planning to offer customers? We're not at this time. There's one other interesting point I'd like to mention about the lockbox. It does provide a fantastic way to give basically all of our on-call or production engineers access to our production servers without them having any access to anything that would be considered customer data. When they do go through the lockbox and they make a request to make a change that impacts customer data, we also audit that. So as an admin on a tenant, you can request a report to see when Microsoft engineers were actually doing something on your tenant, when there was someone actually making a change to your tenant. But no, the lockbox is not something that we're currently planning to make available. Hey, so we're just going to take a slight change of tack. We've been talking about data center security, and we're going to talk. Andy's been talking around this wheel clockwise, starting at the 24-hour mark, and we wanted to take a little change of tack and talk about some of the security aspects that we put into place for our software that we implement in the service. So these 4 aspects: the security development lifecycle, throttling to prevent denial of service attacks, preventing a breach, and mitigating a breach are the 4 things that I wanted to talk about. So first off, our security development lifecycle, and this is something that I noted on the history slide showing how long Microsoft has been involved in cloud services and in software security. And so this is how the security development lifecycle looks like at Microsoft right now. As you can see, it's very pervasive across the entire software development lifecycle. It's not called SDL for no reason. And so it starts off with training. So training is about teaching our engineers how to write secure software and teaching other folks involved in the process how to make sure things are secure. Actually, engineers are required to do security training once a year. And they learn things like don't cause a buffer overrun, don't fill your buffers with things, and don't go over the edge. And we make sure that every one of our developers has training once a year. That training is in fact recorded and is required to be shown before we can release new software into the service or out into the world. So training is where it starts. We work on requirements, and there are security requirements added into each project. And also in design, there are specific phases of the software design which we're required to go through threat modeling to identify what possible security threats there could be to this piece of software or this service that's being developed, and to analyze what the attack surface of that we might model those threats against. During implementation, the primary security aspects during implementation are by the use of specific tools and the use of permissions, so that only developers with the appropriate permissions are actually checking code into our service. You can't go in as a visitor to an office and go in and write some code and add it into a piece of the service. So then in verification is largely talking about the automated tools that we use to both passively and actively look at our software and try to figure out if there's any known flaws with that software. And we have a variety of different tools, from ones that you may have heard of, like FXCOP. That's the internal name. Which is a .NET software analyzer to identify potential security and other flaws that it may have. And security-related flaws are required to be fixed if they're found with these automated tools. There's about half a dozen of those tools that we use. And then release management is about essentially going through all of these prior activities and being able to show with documentation that these have taken place. Did the developers receive training? Was the threat modeling done? And that sort of thing. Also in release, the release management, we have to develop a response plan, a security response plan. And a security response plan is something that's required by the Microsoft Security Response Center for the obvious reason that if they are alerted to an issue with this service or this piece of software, there's a plan in place for what they would do, who they need to contact, and how they can mitigate or avoid that problem that's happened. So the security response plan is an important part of the release, and of course we have to archive and keep hold of the software properly. And then response, which is the response, which is what the Microsoft Security Response Center do, which comes after release or after the service is out there. So this is the security development lifecycle.
And weren't you saying too that the list for the release management now has about 150 check items that are all checked off, audited?
Yeah, it's pretty long. I'm actually doing some release management for a tool that our support team will be using at the moment. And it's a pretty onerous task going through and making sure that all the security operations are properly done. Fortunately, I'm working with a great team, good developers who have done most of these things already. It would be virtually impossible to release software or a service at Microsoft if you didn't have that backup. So the next one here, throttling to prevent denial of service attacks. We have a baseline knowledge of what is touching our service and what out there from customers is interacting with our service. And so it's pretty easy based on that through the use of some of our automated tools to identify a denial of service traffic pattern. And so we work to identify either denial of service from a single origination point, an IP address, or multiple origination points. And we have certain traffic shaping that we can use to remove denial of service from particular locations when that traffic exceeds the normally expected operations. So this helps us with mitigate overload for a few different reasons. It could be malicious. It could be a denial of service. So we obviously don't want those. It could be just simply an accidental use. Oftentimes, customers want to do a load test against Office 365 just to see whether it will meet their needs. We ask customers not to do that because it does actually load up our service, and it also does appear like a denial of service attack. So if you're ever working with a customer and they say, hey, we want to do a load test against Office 365, please come and talk to us, ask us about our performance results that we can share. If the customer does start to do a load test, it will be identified as a denial of service attack pretty quickly, and it will get shut down. So you won't see very good load, and they won't get very good results. It's also possible that there may be buggy clients that cause, ping, 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 ping going on. So we can help to remove those as well. So we work to prevent breach. We do a lot of work on the service to try and prevent the possibility of having a breach. We do a lot of work on our perimeter to identify what might be going on. We have considerable amount of auditing of what our own administrators are doing, as we've talked about already. And then we have tools that work in an automated fashion to identify what might be happening in terms of things that are hitting the service or just operators or engineers that are working with the service. When employees leave the company or they move groups or they simply haven't used their admin permissions for a month, the permissions are revoked and they have to start again. This is even before you start to get to the lockbox. Our engineers have to request admin permissions to the service.
It's just the account, actually. The account that gets deleted.
Yes. So the engineers will have an account on the production services, and then they go through the lockbox, and it's this account which we need to make sure is removed appropriately. So then also we have isolation between our production service, I think, and you mentioned this, the physical isolation that we have, and we make sure that passwords, of course, and other things are stored appropriately. So what do we do to mitigate breaches? Well, unfortunately, mostly we're not allowed to tell you. We do have work to detect, respond, and audit breaches if they occur, and we do have a variety of procedures in these areas. Unfortunately, the team would not allow us to share any information about how we do that, though. This was an internal deck previously. Okay, so here's our agenda. We're up to the second phase. That's been our section talking about what Microsoft does to make sure our service is secure. So this second section, we're going to kick off and talk about what you can do as an administrator to make sure that the service that you administer is secure.
Great. Thanks, Paul. So with the second section, this is really more about the controls inside of Office 365 that we give you, the IT administrators, to start thinking about how to manage access and control within the service. So, earlier I mentioned things like the encryption and everything that we do on the encryption side, but now we'll talk about some of the encryption aspects that you can control and just other aspects of security with Office 365 that you're empowered to enable and either lock down or open up based on your company's policies or your organization's policies and what desired level you need. So when we think about this, we've got four main areas. The encryption, which is where we'll start talking about some of the compliance aspects from a retention and data loss prevention and archiving. User access, of course, identity. As we mentioned in the very beginning, identity is really the center now of how we think about access. And lastly, we'll talk briefly about some of the, what's now known as Exchange Online Protection, which also has antivirus, anti-spam aspects across the whole service. So when we think about encryption, how many of you are familiar with the Windows Server Rights Management Service? It's been around for a while. Okay, just about, well over 75% of the room. So hopefully most of you know that we've also released a Windows Azure version of that service that plugs into Office 365. You can still use Office 365 with the on-prem service or with the new Windows Azure version of RMS as well. But first, when you think about encryption, there's obviously just BitLocker. So here we're talking about on the individual client device. When you think about, hey, all of my client devices should just have encryption on them with BitLocker or some equivalent so that if the device is lost, you can't easily extract that data off. And there's also now BitLocker to go, so you can make sure USB sticks, if you need that level of granularity and protection, any USB device that's storing data that's connected to your network, you can encrypt those. Enforce that upon your users using the device. But basically, that protects you from that aspect. But now, as we showed earlier, it's really becoming more about, hey, if the user's sharing that over the network, how do I lock that down if they try to share it with an external user? And that's really where RMS comes into play. So when we think about how that's working, you've really got and with Windows Azure RMS. What it does is make sure that the identity of that person, when it locks down a document, make sure that identity is verified against the service whenever they try to open it. And then it also makes sure that if the data, the document, is removed from the service, such as downloading a copy, or if you are, for example, sending the document, even if not just as an attachment, but if you're just using it inside of a SharePoint library and you're trying to manipulate it, it's also being encrypted. So again, it just protects to make sure that the document is always locked down. And really, you have a lot of control options in terms of you can apply it to everything inside of your organization. You can apply it to certain site collections inside of your organization. So let's say, we don't need to make sure that every single document is locked down with really high permissions. We just want to make sure that all of our financial data, anything to do from the finance department, needs to always have this level of protection, and you can just control that at a site collection or even a site library level. So we allow you to get very granular, and of course RMS also still works with the individual document, so all the way down to just being able to write protect an individual document. And I'll show some of those options here in just a second. So really, and then lastly, so we have the endpoints there in the middle, and then the last one we have, obviously when you're accessing the data over the internet, we talked already about SSL and TLS, and that we're always encrypting it, and then in the server itself that we have the encryption at rest, which is through BitLocker. So I'm going to go ahead and log in, and we'll walk through some of these RMS type scenarios and what is enabled now inside of Office 365. So you're going to switch me over.
Switch now.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, so we're back inside of our Office 365 tenant. Here I'm showing, again, using Katie Jordan to do the demonstration. So first, I'm going to show the RMS showing up inside of our Outlook client. So this is the Outlook web app. Obviously, you'll also see these RMS policies apply inside of Outlook as well. So we'll go ahead and let that load, and we can go ahead and go down to some different emails here. I've got this one from Sarah. This email happens to be about the budget, and so it's actually relatively sensitive information that we have here today. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to reply to this information with I could maybe add in additional spreadsheets, et cetera, of information, but I want to control what Sarah is able to do with my email. So basically this allows you to control who can do what with your email access. And in this tenant, we just have some sample ones. But basically, do not forward or make it confidential to the company only, so that if it is forwarded to an external person, they would be unable to open the email.
And this Microsoft Confidential, that's actually the company name or the tenant name that you have. It would say Microsoft for customer tenant.
Right. And then view only. So this would be not the ability to edit the email or change it in any ways. This would actually lock it down so they could only look at it. Do not forward is probably the most restrictive RMS policy that you have here, which is where now whatever I write to Sarah, whatever I write to her and whatever the conversation thread is, she's unable now to add any other recipients to the email message, unable to make any changes to it, but can only reply to me, the sender of that email. And so that's by far the most locked down for an email message. But basically, and I'll show what that looks like from her aspect too. If I sign out and sign back in, you can see basically how the different things are grayed out. For example, so if I sign in, I sent that to Sarah, so I'll just log in.
Andy, while you're typing that, we've
Sure.
had this for a little while in Outlook, of course. So you'll notice what Andy's showing is this in the Outlook Web Access, where we've recently introduced RMS.
Mm-hmm. And so I'll just let that load, and then we can see there's the Northern budget. Now notice here you get this nice little icon with circle with the line through it, notifying us that this is an RMS message. It has the do not forward, so they can read, but they can't forward, they can't print, copy the content, and the owner has full rights. So notice the forward button is disabled, and even if I reply to the message, I'm not able to click and add other recipients to that thread. So again, very much locking down that content to the individuals that it was intended for. So that's how it's been applied inside of our Office, inside of Outlook. So now I'm going to go over and take a look at how that same thing has been applied inside of SharePoint, so we can see how RMS is being used in SharePoint. One important thing, just briefly, is that while it's called the service is RMS, inside of Office 365, the products have implemented it under the name Information Rights Protection. So if you see IRM or that name, just understand that's the name of it inside of the individual service, but it's always authenticated against Windows Azure Rights Management or Windows Server.
And you have two questions.
Yeah, I've got 2 questions, so I'll stop before I go on. Yes? Correct.
The question is that client dependent? Yes, it absolutely is.
It is. It is client dependent.
And
one great thing, just to point out, with the new OA, I don't know if you're all familiar, but I'll just sort of demonstrate to you quickly. We also now have versions that basically are designed for mobile devices. So if you haven't seen this, but basically if you were on like an iOS type device, you could see that here you notice that this has the buttons at the sides, at the bottom, so it's more touch friendly. So again, that you have the same experience now with the Do Not Forward, so you're able to access this through a web browser on more devices and have that RMS capability and get access to it. And you can also see, just quickly, I'll just change it to the phone version, so you can see that as well, although it'll look kind of funny on a large screen. Let me make it little more narrow, so it looks like more like a phone device there. You can see how it's in that more narrow device, and you notice you've got that same IRM protection. So this gives you the ability, even though it might not have the rich client on every device, you now have an OA experience that enables you to use RMS across all of your different devices and endpoints. Sir, you had a question?
I had a similar question. Just regarding mobile devices, the iOS and Android.
Yeah, this is really your best. Using the OA web app with the new optimized experience for Design for Touch is really your best way to give them access to their IRM'd email inside those experiences. Sir?
Still require federation of other companies to share RMS protected documents, or do you not require federation anymore? Point federation.
So the question was, what sort of federation is required when you're using RMS with companies that are external? Yes, you still have to do federation with those organizations in order to enable them to be able to open. If you send them an IRM document, they would have to be federated with your RMS service in order to open it. Are you familiar with that?
No, I don't know.
With the Windows Azure one, I'm not sure what the exact federation capabilities are. I know it's absolutely possible to do it with the on-prem RMS service, but I'm not sure for Windows Azure if that federation is built into that yet or not.
We actually have quite a bit of content still to go, so I'd appreciate if we could take questions at the end, if that's okay.
Okay. All right. So going back to
we'll be available for questions after the talk as well. We'd be happy to take those and follow up if we can't answer them.
So going back to our SharePoint site here. Actually, I want to go to the Northwind Traders site. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my document library that I've got here. So just going to this document library. One of the things that we have actually in this one is we've actually applied IRM to this document library. So if I just try and view one of these documents in the web app, you'll see that basically the document will notify me that it has been actually locked down inside of this environment so that it's IRM protected. And essentially, that it really means that as soon as the user tries to download it, it'll be encrypted as well, so that they can't download a copy to say their home computer, or they can't download a copy and try and forward it external. Or if they do forward it external, the person won't be able to open it. Having fun network speed right now. Let's see if we can get it. If I start it over to respond, will it go a little faster? There we go. So let this one load up so you can see what that looks like inside of the thing. There we are. Northwind IRM, this policy forces IRM. Now this is customized, so you as the IT administrator can choose what the title of the policy is. You can have different policies for different SharePoint libraries, and then you can explain to the user what the reason for that is, or what's going to happen when they try and share it, etc. So if I'll show you, I'll go back now. You've seen what the end user, what it looks like from the web apps. And of course, that would show up in the desktop client. But if I go into the administration for this, if I go to library, go to library settings, information rights protection here, you can see the policy that you saw, the Northwind IRM. This is where you can customize the name and what the message is that the user sees. And then you can do all sorts of other options, such as if you want to allow print or block print, it does blocks by default. If you want to make sure, if you want to allow them to get more rights if they download a copy, you can also do things like take away the automatic write viewing and basically make them have to enter their credentials again, or to ping the server for their credential verification, the RMS service. And also you can time bomb the library as well. You can also prevent opening documents in the browser. So this would actually then force them to have to open it in the rich client and use the rich client to verify against the RMS service. So there's a couple, if you want to block any web app viewing, you can do that as well. So there's a lot of options for how you manage that at the individual SharePoint library level as well. So with that, I think we can switch back over to our slides. So this is really just a table more. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on it, but this is just kind of showing you all of the things that when you use the RMS, all of the different options that you get covered with that service relative to some of the other options and what areas they really. But this slide will be online for your reference. If you have areas of questions there. So now I'll turn it over to Paul, talk a little bit about users, since identity is so important to everything we've been showing so far.
All right, so let's talk about user access for a little bit. If you're not aware, Office 365 is built on Windows Azure Active Directory. It has been built on that since we first came out with BPOS. Windows Azure Active Directory recently released a public offering that third parties could use that as well. But Office 365 is entirely built on that. It's a version of Active Directory that we're running in the cloud for customers. We have that integrated. So what that means is your directory, when you're working with Office 365, it's Windows Azure Active Directory, it's in the cloud, and your users are all stored in the cloud and they're authenticated against the cloud. Now, not every organization wants to have all their users just in the cloud, or they don't have them. And so we provide a variety of ways that you can use other directories. The first is we allow you to synchronize your directory using the directory sync tool from an on-premise Active Directory. So if you have an Active Directory that's established, you can install the DirSync tool. You can synchronize your directory, your user objects, and also the one-way hashes of those users' passwords into the cloud. And the password sync was actually just announced 2 days ago. So we've added password sync to that tool. And that means that if you run this DirSync tool, effectively what you're going to get is your Office 365 in the cloud is going to have all your users, your link online is going to show presence for all your users, and your users are going to be able to sign in to Office 365 with the same password that they use on-premise. And when they change that password on-premise, it will be synchronized. The one-way hash will be synchronized to the cloud as well. The password hash is not reversible, so if someone gets the hashes out of the cloud, which they can't do, by the way, they would not be able to reverse them into the user's original password. The second way that we enable you to use other directories is through federation, sometimes referred to as single sign-on, because what federation is effectively you configure Office 365 for federation, you point it to an existing identity provider, and the simplest example is Active Directory on-premise. You point it to an Active Directory federation server, and Office 365 will request all authentication and authorization requests to that federated identity provider, which is typically your Active Directory on-premise. What that means is every time there's an authentication request, a response is required, an affirmative response is required from your domain controller. And so that puts you as an organization in full control of the security of your system. We've enabled a few other identity providers, and we're working to expand the identity providers that we support for federation. And we have a program called Works with Office 365 Identity, where we have about a half a dozen identity providers that we can federate with. We also support Shibboleth, and I know a number of educational institutions use Shibboleth as an identity provider, and we can federate with that. So those are the ways that we can do directory. We've also recently added two-factor or multi-factor authentication through the Windows Azure Active Authentication technology, and this is going into public preview just next week. And what this will mean is we will at no charge allow your administrators for Office 365 to use multi-factor authentication, and there will be a license or a fee for a small fee for adding users to have users have multi-factor authentication. What multi-factor authentication is as a tenant administrator, you will configure certain administrators or users to require multi-factor authentication, and then the next time that user logs in, they'll enter their username and their password, and then they'll be prompted, hey, your account requires multi-factor authentication, and it hasn't been configured, so you have to configure it right away. And that means that user is going to either be able to enter a phone number for a phone call or a text message, or they can download the app, which we have on various app marketplaces, which can receive a push notification when an authentication is required. So the experience for the user once they're configured is they use their username and their password, and then the second factor, the phone that they have, will receive a phone call. They answer the phone call, they press hash, and then they're logged in. If they're using the app, they'll receive a pop-up on the app, and they'll just hit OK, and they're logged in. The key is they own the phone, they have the phone, and they can set up multiple devices if they have one phone at work, one phone at home, and such things like that. So that's coming in preview next week. And it is based on the technology that Microsoft acquired, a company called Phone Factor. So those apps are existing. They're in marketplaces right now. Okay. So I wanted to talk about data loss prevention. Data loss prevention is a new technology that we've introduced in the Office 365 and also in our server products in 2013. And it complements the rights management service that Andy was just talking about. What data loss prevention will do for you is prevent loss where a user is not thinking about security. They're not thinking, hey, I need to go and click on do not forward on this email. They're not thinking about the sensitivity of the data that they are sending out. So there's two specific things that we do. And this is for emails specifically. If you are sending an email, then we have exchange transport rules which will check on the various data loss prevention policies that you've configured. We have out-of-the-box templates for sensitive information as defined by governments all across the world related to identity information and financial information. And so you can turn those on. So we have an exchange transport rule which will block sending an email. So if an email is sent and it violates one of these templates, it will be returned back to the sender. We also have Outlook hints that will come up. So I want to take a moment to show you those now. Go on to here. So the best way to take a look at these is to show you. So here I am on our demo tenant, logged in as Katie Jordan. And if I say, hey, I'm going to go and create a new email to Belinda, who's also in my organization, and I go and grab some customer data. My customer data has some, social security numbers, Visa card numbers, things like that. So if I go ahead and do that, I won't be able to send that. And we see that the policy tip pops up in Outlook. It says, hey, your organization won't allow you to send this data. If you want to send this, you can override your organizational policy. And so I'm going to say, yep, I want to send it. And it says, hey, you've overridden your organization's policy. You'll get audited for doing this. Okay. So I'm going to go send another email. Let's say I send some email to Andy, who's not in my organization, because remember, this is my demo tenant. And I'm going to say customer data, and we'll do the same thing and see what happens. Okay, so we get the same thing coming up, only this time it's not going to let me override, so I can't send it. Outlook has the policy tip, so it's going to block me. If I'm not using Outlook, if I'm using another mail client, the exchange transport rules are going to block me otherwise. But personally, I find the Outlook policy tips much more friendly than being logged and having the thing come back and block me. So that's data loss prevention. It's very simple, but it's very powerful. There are a lot of templates built in for you to use, covering many different countries' definitions of sensitive data. And you can also create your own templates. So if you have your own data that you want to check for and identify, then you can make sure those are blocked as well. So I'll hand back to Andy.
Great, thanks. Yeah, lastly, I think the important thing there is those are completely customizable. So you could disable the override or enable more overrides. It's all very configurable, and you can customize all the messages that people see to really help them move faster. And so when it comes to, that's one aspect when you think about compliance, right, the DLP. But then, of course, Exchange Online, we've enabled some other ones, and I know there have been some other sessions here just going deep into this topic. So if you're really interested in this, I highly recommend you check those out. They'll be in the OUC track. But just from a very high level, we'll just quickly talk about some of the things we have, like in-place hold, which really gives you the ability to do a lot of archiving, advanced archiving. And these are some of the more advanced Exchange Online features, but they basically give you unlimited, with the advanced archiving and compliance features, you're able to have essentially an unlimited archive of with in-place hold, and you're able to do immutable objects. So even if the user deletes the mail, modifies the mail at a later point in time, that original message still has a copy that you're able to discover. Or even you can even set up inactive mailboxes so that if a user leaves the organization, you can still hold on to their mail indefinitely, basically, as long as you need to to meet your compliance standards with Exchange Online. And all of that will be surfaceable through your e-discovery portal. So that gives you some of the abilities to do that. You can also set up from a compliance. Well, that I was talking about the aspect of being able to hold it all forever. You can also force, if you want to force the ability for people to clean out their mailboxes, you can enforce retention policies or just give people a set of retention policies to apply. I love using retention policies just as a way to automatically help me manage my email. You can set different folders for things like, after 30 days, delete mail from this folder, after a year, after 3 years. And those can all be configured by your organization, and you can have as many policies as you want and let people apply those or enforce them through group policy onto people's mailboxes for that purpose. And then from an e-discovery standpoint, basically you're able to now, we've created a unified Exchange, has had e-discovery for a while, but we now have a unified portal inside of SharePoint, which I'll just show you what that looks like here. If you can switch over for me, thank you. So this is sort of this is actually the start of the e-discovery inside of Exchange, but in SharePoint, we now enable you to search both Exchange data, SharePoint data, and obviously link data, which is stored inside of Exchange. And so you can do things like create queries about a particular topic and search whatever documents that you want to, and then you can choose whether or not you want to enable the in-place hold. And so that's where you really are creating, if you are searching for a specific legal case, in those terms, you can then make sure that you have immutable objects of that, and you can specify the hold for certain periods of time, and lots of different options from that aspect. So if we go ahead and apply the filter to these, to these different areas, you can see what the sources that it's searching with inside of those areas, within those document libraries, inside of basically your SharePoint collection sites, etc. And you can also add and manage other areas. So this is where you could add in specific mailboxes. So if we wanted to add in Katie J. We'll just go ahead and do a lookup here on that so we can see her email address. Find Katie J. There we are. Go ahead and save that to this. Yes, we want to add everything that Katie has. And then we're going to go ahead and search her Exchange mailbox. And basically, once we get the query, we can also see, it'll let us preview the results. And then the other aspect of the e-discovery is that it enables us, from the Discovery Center, while that's searching, once you've identified and put things on hold, you can also do an export. And so you could, once you have the items that you have on hold, you can go ahead and do an export into basically a version that you can send off and remove any kind of encryption, anything like that, and you can send that to a legal firm. And we do some nice things like we remove, because legal firms will charge you when they go through every single email, even if that email happens to be in 10 mailboxes, we can do things like remove duplicate copies so that you're only being charged once for that audit and compliance aspect of it. So we'll see, now still searching. Well, in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and jump back over since we've only got 6 minutes left.
Yep.
Well, that's searching. All right. So that kind of gave you just a quick high-level overview. Definitely very powerful ability now, and the in-place hold makes it much easier. And you can also manage that at a user level too. So inside of Exchange, you can go and apply in-place hold to an individual user, from the day that they start until they leave, and store everything that they ever send or do inside of your organization. Awesome. So see here, antivirus, anti-spam. The main thing is that with the Exchange Online Protection, that's the new name for what used to be called Forefront Online Protection. So that's been rebranded. It's been integrated more deeply. Instead of being a separate console, it's been integrated now into the Exchange Online experience. That's where you can manage all of your anti-spam policies. It's again using over 3 engines so that we have all of our bases covered for the greatest amount of protection. You can set up all of your different levels of granularity in terms of, do you want to automatically delete everything? Do you want some things to go to the user's junk mailbox? And so you have different levels in which you can control how that goes, as well as set up individual rules that you can apply for the individual users, or not individual users, for your entire company, so that you can choose what certain IP addresses are always to be let through, et cetera. And then lastly, from an antivirus standpoint, we've also taken what used to be called Forefront and integrated the antivirus into the different services. So you have that inside of Exchange, inside of SharePoint, so that any of the data that's in those before it can execute runs through a antivirus verification. So that's really it from the controls we give you from that aspect. So we've covered off those areas. And really now we're going to just quickly go through some of the independent verification aspects. So when we think about the independent verification, this is really when we go out to some of the standards bodies that exist out there, and we have them audit our policies, procedures, and how we are running our data centers. Again, as Paul mentioned, this is to help make sure that we can scale to the millions of customers that we are trying to serve, and make sure that we're able to give everyone, yes, these are the standards that we're meeting and applying and are applicable to us, while at the same time being able to scale, since we can't have every single customer come to our data centers. And it also means that because most companies adhere to some of these similar standards, it also saves time and money for companies. They don't have to go and create their own auditing system and figure out how best to judge their cloud providers. They can use these standard approaches across the board. So I think this is probably the most useful aspect in thinking about how we meet some of the different compliance and regulatory certifications around the world. Really, when you think about our data centers, they were really built on top of ISO 27001. That's actually the basis for a lot of these other certifications. So that was the first one we went after when we were designing our data centers back. We went after that one back in 2007 when the Microsoft Online Services were first getting going. And from there, we've been able to build out additional ones like EU model clauses or FISMA, HIPAA, and that has really enabled us to expand beyond that and build on top of them. And now, after some of the initial ones, we've now been adding more and more certifications every year, and we continue to go after the most strategic, important ones to cover the widest industries and geographic regions. So, for example, recent ones have been a lot of law enforcement and government ones in the U.S. and the UK, and then also always looking at financial service certifications for verification as well. So we have 2 minutes for questions, Paul.
Wow.
2 whole minutes. So just basically in summary, we've covered off all of the different ways in which we give both you control, what we do in our data centers, and then how we make sure that third parties are making sure the service is available, secure, and what policies and management options we have to provide you with the best. Yes, I'm done.
All right. So we appreciate you all staying for our talk. We hope you'll do us an eval. Please visit the Office 365 Trust Center, which talks about all of these things that you've seen today. Our slides, of course, will be available. It looks like Andy and I are going to be taking questions up at the podium because I see there's people leaving and then people are wanting to ask questions. So I imagine that's what we're going to have to do. Let me switch this to the... One more. There. That's the one I have to show. Yeah, if that's okay.